Disney's Cruella, a novelization. Chapter 8. Estella tried to get to her feet. Beside her, Jasper did the same. But they weren't quick enough. Jasper went down first as a security guard grabbed him and tackled him. Another security guard stepped in front of Estella before she made it past the display case. The guard put his hand atop Estella's head and shoved it down, so her cheek was pressed against the cold display case. Estella struggled, but there was no getting away from his grip. "Sorry, Baroness," Gerald said. "This is the vandal who messed up the whole window display. We'll deal with it." There was a moment of silence. Estella wished she could see the Baroness's face, but all she could see were the gems in the case below. Finally, the woman spoke. "She works here?" "She was fired," Gerald said quickly. "We try to give these wretches a chance, but breeding—" Estella mumbled something, prompting the security guard to smush her face harder against the unforgiving glass of the display case. "So, she doesn't work here," the Baroness clarified. I, he stuttered. He clearly wasn't sure what the Baroness wanted him to say. The Baroness shook her head. "You're sweating," she said. The comment made Estella smile, despite her situation. "And I can smell you. Step back." "Agreed. Brilliant," he said quickly, causing Estella's smile to broaden. It was fun to see her boss be the one in the hot seat for once. "You, grubby girl." The Baroness's voice had shifted. Craning her head to the side as best she could, Estella saw the Baroness was looking at her. The older woman gestured to a slight man who had been standing off to the side. "Geoffrey," she said. "Card." With a nod, Geoffrey hustled toward Estella. He reached into the front pocket of his suit and pulled out a card. "You're hired," he said. "This address, 5 a.m. Don't be late." He tried to hand her the card, but the security guard wouldn't let her go. "Teeth," Estella said, for that was the only way she could possibly grab the card. Gingerly, Geoffrey placed the card in front of Estella's mouth. She quickly snatched it, and then, shrugging off the guard's gasp, freed herself. At the same time, Jasper slid free of his captor. As if on cue, Horace reappeared, with bags of stolen loot dangling from both hands. Not waiting to see how the rest of the moment would play out, the three bolted. Behind them, the Baroness observed this all with a sort of detached curiosity. Just as Estella reached the door, she heard her say to Gerald, "You're a fool. That girl has put together the best window display that I've seen you do in 10 years. As the trio slid out of the store and onto the busy sidewalk, Estella couldn't stop smiling. The card was clenched in her hand. It was real. The Baroness had liked her window. And even better, she had a new job. A job with the Baroness. Forget Liberty. She was moving on up. They hopped into the back of an open truck and headed home to the lair. Estella couldn't stop staring at the card. It was beautiful, creamy and thick. It looked important, just like the woman who had given it to her. Written across the middle in bold cursive were the words, Baroness Enterprises. Beneath that was an address in a smaller font. Estella ran her hand over the lettering, the raised letters making her shiver. When the truck lumbered by the lair, she and the boys jumped out. Still, Estella didn't look up from the card. Once safely inside, Estella plopped down on her bed and held up the card. "She liked my window, Jasper." Her voice was soft as she met Jasper's gaze. He had been patiently waiting for her to talk. "She liked my window." Jasper smiled. "I'm happy for you," he said. She returned the smile. "All thanks to you." Horace, who had been busy sorting through the loot from the store, looked up. "Is this the angle?" he asked. Estella laughed. He was incorrigible, but she didn't care. There was no angle. Starting tomorrow morning, she was finally going to take the fashion world by storm. 5 a.m. came quickly. Estella had spent most of a restless night too excited to sleep, and when she did sleep, her dreams were filled with heads of mannequins and bolts of fabric. By the time her alarm went off, she had already been dressed and ready to go for an hour. Now she stood in front of a huge warehouse. The sun hadn't yet risen, so the street was dark, save for the occasional lamp that flickered. The large doors had not yet opened, and Estella shifted nervously on her feet. She looked down at the card, clutched in her hand, to check the address once again. Suddenly, the door burst open. Geoffrey, the Baroness's assistant, looked out at her. "Ah, you," he said, as though surprised to see her, even though he had been the one to tell her where to be and when. "Come in." Estella didn't hesitate. As Geoffrey led her into the warehouse, Estella's head swiveled back and forth. She was desperate to take it all in. From the outside, the warehouse had looked like any other, but inside it was completely different. Soft lights illuminated the walls, making them glow and revealing mannequins adorned in some of the Baroness's most stunning designs. These, Estella realized happily, were the Baroness's signature pieces, and there they were, right there, close enough to touch. Opening another door, Estella and Geoffrey entered a large room encased in glass, the workroom. It was alive with activity. Seamstresses were sewing. Designers were sketching. Bolts of fabric were being wheeled in and out. Everywhere she looked, there were images of clothes in various stages, from simple sketch to completed look. It was the most wondrous room Estella had ever stepped foot in. Estella walked amid it all in a daze. Suddenly, she had a strange sensation, as if someone was watching her. She looked around. Everyone was focused on their work. Craning her head, she looked up, and her steps hesitated as she saw an office perched above them. It was surrounded by a balcony, and seemed to somehow be floating above them. Standing on the balcony, looking down at her, was the Baroness. The Baroness watched as first Estella and then Geoffrey noticed her eyes on them. She wasn't often impressed by anyone other than herself, but there had been something inspiring in Estella's window display. Seeing it, the Baroness had made the hasty decision to hire her, mostly so she could keep an eye on this girl and prevent her from inspiring others with her own work. The Baroness prided herself on keeping ahead of any potential threats, and while Estella wasn't a threat yet, it was better to keep her underfoot. Her face neutral, the Baroness watched with a mixture of joy and pride as panic flooded the faces of her employees below. She waited for Geoffrey to do his job. "Silence!" he shouted. Instantly, all activity in the room stopped. No one moved. No one breathed. Well, no one except for one man, who stood behind a cart of fabric, discreetly wheezing. "I can hear breathing," the Baroness said. "I've got asthma," the man said, trying to explain. The Baroness simply raised an eyebrow. Instantly, the man sucked in his breath. While his face grew red, the Baroness turned and addressed everyone else. "My last show was a triumph. Shall I read from Tattletale?" Not bothering to wait for a response, she lifted a paper. Estella recognized the fashion section. She devoured it daily. "Baroness Designs stunned with her reinvention of the A-line, with a bias cut and higher line that reshapes the sill." On the floor below, the man with the asthma drew in a shaky, loud breath. The Baroness paused. Then, with a pointed frown, she went on. "Whoat, in such an audacious way, the audience broke into rapturous applause at first sight. She really is a genius." At the last word, the Baroness nodded, clearly in agreement. "Shall I read that last bit again? She really is a genius." She closed the paper. "A triumph. Again. Take a moment to revel in it." For one brief second, the employee seemed to relax. Smiles started to tug at their lips. The asthmatic man inhaled. The Baroness let them enjoy the moment. It would only make the next one more enjoyable to her. Just when she was sure all their heartbeats had returned to normal, the Baroness threw the paper down, and the moment was over. "That's enough," she said. "New show! We must be perfect! Now go!" With orders dispatched, she did an about-face and headed back into her office. Being the boss was such fun. Being the most frightening fashion boss was even better. As the Baroness settled back behind her desk, she allowed herself a smile. She really did love her life. Estella didn't know what to do. The room was once again abuzz, but she wasn't sure what she was supposed to be buzzing over. Noticing her bewilderment, Geoffrey clapped his hands to get her attention. "You! Window girl!" he said. "Grab a mannequin, some fabric, and throw something together. The Baroness needs looks." With a curt nod, he bustled away. That was it? Just throw something together. Estella hesitated, staring at the other designers busily working. They all seemed to have an idea in mind. But how long had they been working there? The looks they created could have taken weeks, years even, to create. She was supposed to just make one now? She didn't even know where to find the fabric. Taking a deep breath, Estella straightened her shoulders. She hadn't made it this far without being quick on her feet. If the Baroness wanted a new look, Estella would make one. She spotted a doorway on the other side of the room and made her way through it. This was where she had seen the fabric come in. Maybe there was more. Sure enough, walking through the door, she found herself in a stairwell. Racks of fabrics lined the dark space. Even in the dim light, the colors were bright and bold. Estella smiled. This she could work with. She began to gather her material, a yard here, a yard there. Chiffon, silk, denim. There was every type of fabric imaginable. Soon her arms were full, and she made her way back into the workroom. For the next hour, Estella lost herself in her work. The sounds of the room faded away as she snipped and tucked, gathered and folded, sewed and pinned. She hadn't started out with a plan, but as always happened, with the material in her hand, a look began to materialize. For some reason, she had been drawn to the pink fabrics in the stairwell. Maybe it was because she was so used to using bland colors to blend in. Maybe it was because she was in a good mood. Whatever the reason, bit by bit, the pinks came together, their slightly different shades blending into a dress that was both demure and demanding of attention. Standing up to stretch, Estella realized that the room had grown quiet. Even as a recent hire, Estella knew that could mean only one thing. The Baroness was coming. The designers were now standing next to their mannequins, hands nervously clutched in front of them. Estella moved beside her mannequin and waited. On cue, the Baroness entered the workroom. Without a word, she walked down the line of mannequins, eyeing them and assessing them instantly. "Foolish," she noted to one. "Unhinged," she said to another. Stopping in front of a particularly outlandish design with elaborate beading and multiple fabrics sewn together. "You're fired." Finally, she came to Estella's creation. Once again, the Baroness paused. Estella held her breath. She felt the other designer's eyes on her as the Baroness's eyes ran up and down the simple line of the dress, her head cocked. There was a pause that seemed to last for eternity. "Not bad," the Baroness said. Estella's breath was just about to whoosh out of her body when the Baroness pulled out a razor and in one swift move whipped it over the excess fabric. Estella had been going to get to that. She had just run out of time. Though she had to admit, as she looked at the Baroness's work, she would not have done such an amazing job. With a few quick flicks of the razor, the Baroness had formed the dress into a tighter, cleaner design. One more flick, and the Baroness was done, though Estella winced as she was nicked in the process. "Ow," she said softly, looking at her hand. A small red dot had appeared on it. Why are you speaking? The Baroness responded. Estella held up her hands. Oh, sorry, she said. I think you nicked me. The Baroness said, taking Estella's hand and lifting it to her face. She examined the drop of blood closely and shouted over her shoulder, Fabric! Get me a red like this! Then, without another word, she left. Estella watched her go, her mind racing. The Baroness hadn't hated her design. True, but she hadn't said she loved it either. At least she hadn't fired her, so that was something, wasn't it?